Hello. Oh wait, my microphone. No intro today. Because it's not today, it's tonight. And I am attempting to wrap up my night. And I was sitting here about to write in my journal. And then it hit me to just turn on this camera because I felt like there was something churning, even though I don't exactly know what I came here to say, right? I got a new microphone. Somebody who was watching my videos regularly, I guess, they said, you need a new mic. What's so funny is that I'd already ordered one when they said that. But I just thought it was kind of cool that, they're like, good talk, you need a new mic. And I'm like, thank you. So I was sitting here about to write into my journal tonight, and I was just thinking that in life, there are always these moments where you are overwhelmed with your contrast, where you may be overwhelmed with something that you don't want to deal with anymore, but you have not necessarily gained what you're supposed to out of the situation. So therefore, this thing is still going on, right? And so I was just thinking about how easy it is to have that sort of contrast, and then you let your brain just kind of spiral into the most negative spaces possible. And usually when the brain's spiraling, it's just looking for blame, right? And whether the blame is you, whether the blame is your mate, whether the blame is your children, whether the blame is your, parents, your siblings, whoever, you just kind of, the people at work, whatever, you're just looking for someone and something to point at to say that this is why my day is messed up. This is why I didn't get what I want. This is why I don't have what I want, right? But we have to remember that that is never the case. It's just not. And while we want to think all the time that our ego wants to think that it is so evolved outside of things that it can't possibly be us. We can't possibly be the problem. I can't possibly have the power in me to look at this thing differently, or it can't possibly be a different situation. It's so important to remember that all that's a lie. and that it just is, because there's not a moment in my life where there's not been some kind of contrast, where there's not been something that was unwanted at any given time, something that I wanted to be different than the way it was, right? That I wanted to see differently. And it was very hard to do that. And to be victorious in these moments, I really, this is a tool that I use all the time. I really think about all the times in my life where I had some ridiculous contrast, and I banged my head against the wall of it over and over and over and over and over again. And then one day I decided to look at it differently. And then it didn't bother me at all. And I can think back to so many times. Because you can't develop and grow without that being a part of your process. If your process is something I don't like, there's somebody to blame, let me just run the other way, or this particular thing just not working for me, let me just run the other way, then you'll see yourself having the circular patterns in life where you're not ever truly having a vertical, an upward trajectory. You're always doing these lateral moves, right? Because nothing's really growing you because you haven't settled down into radical accountability, right? And radical accountability is really hard because in those situations, even when there are specific people that you can look right at and say, this is why this happened, this is why this occurred, this is why this is this way, or whatever it is, it still doesn't matter. Because there was some part of you that was playing a role in the situation that couldn't see beyond or couldn't be beyond the situation or whatever it was that you were creating. So you were not evolved enough to avoid this thing that you dislike, right? And so I think this comes to play when people talk about grudges with other people and trying to hold other people accountable for the way that we feel. And it's really just not possible, right? And sometimes it may make us feel good to treat people, give them the cold shoulder because we don't like something they did to us, or, not give them all of our positive energy because we don't like the situation or something like that. But really all you're doing is minimizing yourself and shutting yourself down. It's like radical accountability is so painful sometimes that we don't have a choice. Because if we don't take that route, then we're going to always find ourselves making these lateral moves and going in circles, right? And always looking for who did it, who can I blame, and why don't I have what I want, right? And so when I think about these kind of things, I think about also forgiveness of other people. So so you've probably heard this before. We think forgiveness has something to do with letting other people off the hook, but we already know that it really has nothing to do with the other people, right? That they could have been anybody. And if we were in a place to let some behavior happen or to be a part of some negative energy that we didn't want to experience in our lives, but when we were in that place, that person could have been anybody, right? Sometimes myself, this is something that I know that I deal with. I get really annoyed if I think that I wasn't being my strongest version of myself in a situation, or if I wasn't, if I was making decisions out of fear and not out of the bigger version of who I am, right? You have to excuse me, I'm on the verge of tears, but it's like I'm not upset or sad or anything like that. It's just sometimes when something makes profound sense to me all of a sudden, I get really emotional about it. But I'm kind of a big girl, so I can keep the emotions at bay, right? But nonetheless, my voice may tremble. But this level of radical acceptance that, okay, you were not the strongest version of yourself when you made that decision. You did not see yourself in the light that you know who you are. You did not see yourself as the goddess that you know you are. You were not in that place. So when that decision was made, you have to deal with the consequences of your lower self. And that's all that is. And sometimes it's so painful for us to believe that we have to sit in the consequences of our lower self sometimes until we work through it. And this can be for anything. I work with quite a bit of people all the time, and I'll hear people sometimes like in conversations, because I listen to people a lot because I'm kind of nosy, first of all. I do listen to people when I listen to them talk. And it's not that I'm nosy because I care about their business. It's almost like a sociological experiment sometimes. Sometimes I just listen. And because sometimes I'm listening to these things, I hear people talk about some sicknesses that they have or some pains that they have or whatever's going on in their lives. And they just attribute it to, well, that's the way life goes and that's the way life shakes out. And I think to myself about how hard is it for you to say that the reason why I have these diabetes, or the reason why I have high blood pressure, or the reason why I had the stroke is because I was making decisions in my lower self, and now I know better, but I still have to sit in the consequences of my lower self, right? Nobody wants to do that. Because when you do that, you take all of the onus off everybody and everything in your environment. It doesn't matter if the commercials for Popeyes was coming on every 2 seconds. It doesn't matter if your mama made, sweet cakes on Sundays and you had to eat it to make her feel better. Or it doesn't matter. None of these things really matter. The point is that you weren't at your higher self when you were making the decisions in order to consume those things. So now the results of it, if you're being honest with yourself, it's because of the lack of decision making on your part, right? And so the interesting part about this is that sometimes we do have situations to where people were caught up into our lower versions of ourselves, right? And it's not their fault. They just happen to be hanging around. And so I notice even with myself, if there's some kind of decision that I made in a version of myself that I didn't like, anybody who was around when that decision was being made, or anybody who reminds me of that version of that person, I have a real problem with them. And it's not that I have a personal problem with them. I just want to erase that part of my life and my time and my energy and just turn my attention into another direction. But what I'm noticing now as I mature and as I continue to expand and to grow and all that kind of stuff and evolve, I'm noticing that doesn't do the trick, right? That because that's still a version of finding some other way to not take accountability for the circumstances that you find yourself in, right? And so a lot of times it's things that we know clearly about ourselves, right? I had a friend of mine a while ago. I remember we took a trip together and stuff. And so we was having like late night girl talk and stuff. And she was just saying how disappointed in herself that she was not living the life that she thought she was supposed to live, that she doesn't understand how she's a person who's living in the suburbs, raising kids, and a stay-at-home mom for the most part with high-level degrees, that sort of thing. And at the time I was sitting there thinking like, a lot of women will really want that situation, but she doesn't want it. And that's the point of the whole conversation. And I've known her for a very long time, and she's never wanted that lifestyle, right? But when she was feeling scarcity about a relationship, or scarcity about the man that she come in contact with, or just scarcity about this being the best man that I've dated or something like that, she let herself get caught up in the whirlwind of maybe this is the best, and so I should go along with this program. And so when we do that kind of stuff to ourselves, we really, really do take a hit. And not only do we take a hit, everybody around us take a hit, because they're not getting the best full version of who we are. They're not getting the high quality version of who we are, right? And we want to give that to people, but at the same time, we're not living the lifestyle and the places, and we're not doing exactly what we want to be doing. We're not in environments we want to be in. We're not around the friendships we want to be in. And sometimes, I always say this to my daughters, it takes to see that stark contrast for you to let yourself go so far down one road that where you were not being your biggest version, where you were not being your best self, to go so far down that road for you to actually see that it needs to change, right? And sometimes when you need to change these things, the people that you are around, they're not going to be the same people, because it just almost can't. If they can't accept this version of you that's outgrown any level of neediness or attachment to certain things, or attachment to the friendship, or attachment to the relationship, or attachment to the job, attachment to the money, whatever the attachments were, a lot of times we don't even know how to keep relationships intact, or like keep friendships intact when they go through these types of phases, right? Because I've seen it enough in my life to know I've had so many sets of friend groups. And I think it's probably the only time in my life that I've not had a friend group. It's weird enough. And I can see the stark contrast in where I visualize things that I want in my life to be a certain way, and then where some of them are, right? And it's not until I get myself in a position where I am forced to see the results of the lower self decisions, where I really can just spiral. And I think, many people are like that, right? Where you can get to the point where you're just like, it has to be something else. It has to be another reason for it. I can't be this bad. It can't be this, it can't be this terrible of a circumstance. This has to be somebody to blame it on so that I can feel better about this thing, right? So I find that when you're truly getting to the place in your life where you are able to walk into radical accountability, you start flying through phases really, really quickly, right? So like where it's taking you, oh, this pimple's big, where it's taking you some time in the past to like work through things, and you fought it, and you had transitions, and you were trying to figure it out. And you'll find that if you employ this idea of radical accountability and you don't let your brain get into the mode where it's trying to search for the people or the places or the things that force you to make the bad decision or the wrong choice or the wrong connection or the wrong idea, whatever you think went wrong in your life, where you get into that place and you don't allow your brain, you allow it to stay tunnel vision, and you focus on you and you focus on your growth only and your development only, that you'll find yourself flying through phases in life, right? I mean, I can clearly see this with myself, like things that would take me under many, many years ago, like they don't even touch me now. And so I've graduated to new problems, to new issues, to new things, right? It's kind of like women that think, oh, my life would be so much better if I were in a relationship. It's a different kind of problem. Single is one kind of problem. Relationship is another kind of problem. I promise you, it is. There's no getting around this, right? And even if you decide, oh, I want to do something different with my life, I want to take it to a new place, you can get to the places to where you find this bliss more often and this peace more often, right? But it doesn't come through running away from things. It doesn't come through running from radical accountability. That type of bliss and that type of ease comes from, I am accountable for me. I made these decisions and now I need to be accountable for fixing them, or I need to be accountable for being responsible for them, right? And their outcomes. And that's it. That's what we got. And so you see yourself, like I can look at journals that come from like 2022 was some kind of year for me, man. I must have went through every single phase and change. And I'm really shocked that I was able to make 147 some odd videos in between a lot of up and down kind of days, right? And what I noticed, and we're coming into this new year, because I'm not big on New Year's resolutions, but just there's always like a new beginning. There's always like a new energy that comes up in the beginning of years, like at the beginnings. And so while you don't need the new year in order to make changes and do things in your life, you can feel that there's a renewing of energy in the air, whether it's, on January 1st or just around that time of the year. There's a reset that happens like all around us, right? And so when I found myself coming into this year in this space, there was a part of me that was just like, no more. It's like, I can't do anything for anybody that I don't want to do anymore. I can't compromise. I can't negotiate. It's not in me and I'm not interested. And you just have to know who you are, right? Like I'm a kind of person, I have really specific ways that I want to see my life, or either somewhere along that line, or like many goddesses that I know say beyond my wildest dreams, right? And so you have to know these things and not allow yourself to get pulled in by scarcity mindset or fearful mindset or misunderstanding yourself or not misunderstanding yourself. I mean, that's one way to put it, but there's another way to put it. Not trusting yourself, right? Because many of us, we can say we grew up in places where we weren't allowed to trust ourselves. Our parents grew up in places where they weren't allowed to trust themselves, and their parents grew up in places where they weren't allowed to trust themselves. So these are like generational things that keep going down the line. And so when we have not learned the deep, loving action of trusting ourselves and trusting what we want and trusting what we don't want and trusting what we believe and what we don't believe, anytime Dick or Harry can walk up in our life, or Debbie Downer or Maggie Sue, whoever you want to call them, Jane Doe, John Doe, whatever, they can walk up in our space and tell us how we think is wrong, what we're doing is wrong, how we see it is wrong, your perspective is off, right? And any fears that they have or any smallness in them, it jumps right off on you because you're not solidified in who you are. And if it has an ability to seep on the inside of you, if the smallness has an ability to get into you and to get in your head and to infect you like a virus, that means you have something more to learn. That's it. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. It doesn't mean you failed. It doesn't mean you won't get what you want. It doesn't mean you're not going to figure it out. It just means that in that area, you have more work to do. Because you'll remember the time, you'll remember deeply how I feel. I don't think there's any other way to do radical acceptance in not learn it by sitting in the circumstance that you don't like, right? There's no other way for us to mostly get these things, right? Like, because for the things that we want to grow in, we want to learn and we want to expand in. I was learning a whole bunch of things today on a Zoom meeting that, just somebody was showing me how to do some technical stuff. And I was like, oh, this is so fun. I was like, I didn't have to be, there's no pain. I didn't have to be forced to grow there. I'm growing there very easily. It's nothing, right? But in the areas where we notice, those are the areas that need the most work. And because they need the most work, they usually go way back. That means we've been holding on to it for a really long time, right? You get in your 40s and you got that thing that you haven't figured out. You've been holding on to it for a minute. And so some of those things, they're so comfortable to us, we have to fight them out of ourselves. And so it's like the easy way wouldn't have worked. And so if the easy way would have worked, you would have learned it the easy way. But because that wasn't available to you, you had to be in a situation to where you had to do radical acceptance, and you had to sit with the circumstance and think to yourself, never again will I let somebody steer my life. Never again will I let somebody make me think a decision that I made was not true. Never again will somebody walk up in my life and decide that this thing is not important about me and I'll let it happen. Never again will somebody just say to me, I don't like the way that you homeschooling your kids or something like that. Lots of people told me that kind of stuff, but I was so solid in that nobody couldn't budge me on that. I was like, oh no, they're at home. I'm good. No social skills. I'm like, oh, they'll get social skills. We're fine. Right. So some things that we are solidly in, we know what we can do. Right. But sometimes when we have some holes in there and we haven't built ourselves up appropriately in those areas, anybody can come around and get us to think in our lower version of ourselves, and we'll make decisions there. And it's not like some decisions are easy. It's just like, awful. I wish I went and went shopping with her. I wouldn't have bought that ugly dress. I was only doing it because everybody else was spending money. I knew I couldn't afford it, and I don't like this dress anyway. Well, that's so easy to get out of that situation, isn't it, right? Go return the dress. You can't return it. Sell it on eBay or Poshmark, whatever, or give it to a family member. Sell it to, you know what I mean? But there are some decisions that you make and you shift your entire life circumstances. And in those moments, the only thing that can work is radical acceptance. The only thing that can work is for you to pull that strength that's so deeply embedded down inside of you and not let this thing take you under, and find that strength, find that hero, because you're your own hero. Nobody else is coming to save you, right? Because let me tell you, I don't care how close people are to you, they're looking out for themselves, bottom line. And so you got to be your own hero and say, no, never again will this happen. And it has nothing to do with the people, the person that's around you, the place, or any really particular moment or something like that. It has to do with you. So it's almost like you look in the mirror and you fuss at yourself and you go, hey, we're not doing this anymore. We saw what the outcome of this was, not trusting ourselves. We saw what the outcome was with thinking somebody else had something more figured out than us. Then the universe showed us immediately that they didn't. And we're just like, but wait, I already made the bad decision. And so we do these things. And so I think I probably rambled on long enough right now. And I know I got on pajamas, but I really just don't care. And I was just thinking like, oh, there's something I wanted to say before I sit and settle into my night and write in this journal and maybe eat something before I go to bed. And I was just thinking about how important it is for us to have radical acceptance in order to become an alchemist, in order to transfer what we're calling a negative circumstance into something that you have to do something positive with. And the most positive way I think you can make any situation that's negative or something you don't like or don't want is to use it as an opportunity to have radical accountability, radical acceptance, and say, hey, what did you do wrong in this situation? What don't you like about this outcome? What version of yourself made a decision? And how will you avoid doing this again, right? And what's so crazy, when you get to those points and you start hitting those things, because I've done it with so many things in my life, because this is not the first time. I mean, I've done it with so many things, so many times. I mean, I think a lot of women know, like, if you were divorced or something and you're raising kids and you don't get the support that you think you're supposed to get from the other half, I had to create radical accountability for that and radical acceptance. I had to tell myself that you married what you got. You attracted it. You created it. You had the children in it. You had the marriage in it. You never got what you were looking for. And somehow you think it was supposed to be different. So you have to tell yourself, there's nothing wrong with that person. That person was the same the whole time I knew them. They were the same from the first day I met them. And they're the same to this very single day. And so you have to look at yourself and say, hey, that's nothing. They didn't do anything wrong. I'm the wrong one. I thought that I could, change somebody's mindset or their belief system or who they were. And because they were stronger in who they were and I wasn't, I was feeling like I was some kind of victim because I allowed myself to be jerked around and pulled around when really I'm the only one who was looking for something to be different. I'm the only one that was sitting there thinking that, oh, I can't believe this. I can't believe it. Guess what? They can believe it because that's who they are, right? And so I had to do this several times in life. And I would meet women all the time who would be angry at their ex-husbands and angry. And I didn't have none of that. And they were just like, well, how can you be so? And I'm like, oh, because I had to accept that that's what I married. And then it didn't work out. And that was perfect. And so you already know you have the ability to do this, right? I mean, and I've done this with so many situations. And so when you come up against this stuff again, that it can't take you under. It can't put you in depression for days at a time. It can't make you cry while you're driving home from work. But if you got to cry while you're driving home from work, go ahead and do that. That's perfectly fine. If you got to cry in the bathroom at work, go do it. Whatever. Because sometimes it's just like that. But what I mean is that this stuff is not piling on top of you and you're feeling like a victim and like you can't get on the other side of it, right? So I guess that's my message for tonight. It's kind of radical accountability and understanding your role. And then when you can do that clearly, then you can actually transform what you might think is the most awful or negative or horrible situation into something that you can use to grow and for your greater good, right? So even if you do think there's somebody to blame, right? What's they say? If you think you need to get, funny enough, when people actually are in a position for revenge, they don't even care about it, right? It's not even important. And like people always think that when they get successful, they're going to care about all the people that told them they weren't going to be successful. No, because becoming the successful person, you don't have any interest in what people didn't think you can do or not. You realize that it didn't have anything to do with you, that it was a limitation of them. And you were just, on the same frequency. And whether we wanted to admit it or not, many people and things or happenings in our lives are because we were on that frequency. So when we have to sit in that lower frequency we have to sit in that lower situation for a while that we don't see as something that we want. The worst thing that we can do is allow it to lower our frequency, because then we'll get more of the same, more of the doubt, more of the fear, more of the scarcity, more of the negativity, more of the loneliness, And I say loneliness, I'm not talking about other people, because there are times when I feel lonely and it's just me. And there are times when I feel abundantly full of, energy and people, and I don't even have people around me. So what I mean is you can be lonely to yourself when you don't recognize what you're creating. And then you can also be lonely when you have people around. So it's like you won't get to this place where you're falling, I'll say, victim to it, right? You'll get to the place where you're just like, this is not me. I don't like it. I'm going to start working my way out of it. I'm going to put a timeline on it. I'm going to figure this out. And I'm going to decide that there's no more fear attached to it. There's no more scarcity. I'm not taking on anybody else's limited belief system. And if my life is not going to be exciting and daring and interesting, then I don't want to do anything at all, right? I think that's Helen Keller, and it's not her exact words, right? Like, if life is not daring, then it's nothing at all. Because what are you doing? We're all going to die, So it's like playing things safe and comfortable and all is only good for so long when you have small babies, maybe. But as you get older and you start to think about, what are the things that I want to accomplish and do in life, you can't afford to not be solid in who you are. You can't afford to not trust who you are, right? You can't afford to let every Tom, Dick, and Harry or Mary Jo Sue, these names I'm coming up with, right? Come around and tell you that what you're doing is this and that and make you feel less than, right? You'll know the difference between someone that's coming around to lift you up and make you feel like you can accomplish anything. And you'll also know the difference with somebody who's so bogged down in their own fear and scarcity mindset and limited mindset that they couldn't give that kind of stuff to you even if they wanted to, right? You'll know. And sometimes there's nothing better than sitting in the consequences of a lower version decision of yourself for you to really get the wake up call to say, hey, I have to be accountable for my life. Period. Anyway, 30 minutes. I haven't made a 30-minute video in forever. Have a wonderful, wonderful night.